Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to talk about our small-bodied cousins with no chins. That's a significant thing. The fact that they don't have a protruding chin has a lot to do with this story. This story is really the story of a triumph of good science over bad. The story revolves around a hominin called Homo floresiensis, and there was a lot of debate over this one, whether or not to call it genus Homo or not, and all the rest. Now, the second name, Floresiensis, that scares a lot of people. I'll talk you through how to pronounce it. She was found on the island of Flores. That's where we get the first part, Floresiensis. Iensis just means person from or hominin. So it's the Flores hominin. This is her. In fact, there were 8 individuals found in the same cave, or the remains thereof. This is the best preserved skull that we have, and it tells us a lot. First of all, just looking at it, you can see that it's got this falling back chin with the protruding teeth, the large protruding teeth. This tells us this is probably a pre-anatomically modern human. What we're looking at here looks really, for all intents and purposes, like a Homo erectus, which we met before. It's got a relatively strong brow ridge, this long, low, almost football-shaped cranium. The cranium, the brain case, is actually pretty big considering the size of the face. It's in proportion. It's in what we would see that same proportion that we saw in Homo erectus. This is where she was found. The upper image shows us the island of Flores. This cave below, the image below, shows us it's a huge cave complex. In fact, a lot of people, meaning modern and ancient apparently, people were living in that cave for a very long time. So it's been dug for a long, long time. What they did not expect to find is a fossil. Now, we did mention that Homo erectus was found on the island of Java, for example, which is a close by island. You can see in the upper image here. Flores is a relatively small island in Indonesia, and it has relatively few resources, natural resources, and that also plays a major part in our story. This is the most striking aspect of Homo floresiensis, is how small they are. If you see on your left, we have genus Homo floresiensis. On your right, we have an anatomically modern human woman. These are both female. What we're looking at is, this is pretty much in scale. You can see that the entire skull of Homo floresiensis is about the size of 2 anatomically modern human fists, or it would fit into basically her brain case. It is a tiny, tiny little individual. Their bodies were also tiny. So what is going on? Well, other evidence that was recovered from the Liang Bua cave is fossils of stegodons. That's a dwarfed elephant. I know, that sounds so cool, right? Everybody wants to have a dwarfed elephant. Can you imagine walking a dwarfed elephant around your neighborhood? Like, yeah, everybody else has dogs, and you've got all right. Well, the exciting thing about the dwarfed elephant is it may tell us a little bit about what's going on with Homo floresiensis's bodies, but also the fossils of stegodon had obvious cut marks on the bones, meaning they were butchering. The obvious use of fire from charred bone, organic material, and a hearth in that cave. In fact, several. A hearth means a fireplace. So they're basically cooking and eating and apparently butchering stegodon, which is very interesting. And the last thing that's really interesting is an advanced stone tool industry. This plays a huge part too in why Homo floresiensis becomes a superstar. She may not be that much of a superstar in our direct history, but she is a superstar. I say she because the main one was a female. Because she plays a huge part in how we understand our own history. And I'll talk about that in a minute. First of all, everybody wants to see what the fossil stegodon would have looked like. Here it is. Here's a normal Asian elephant. Here we see standing huge, standing at a shoulder of about 8.5 feet. Down here is the average stegodon. Tiny little things, but they're clearly related to elephants. Here we have LB1, little Floresiensis here, and here is a modern, anatomically modern human female. Here we have, again, the skull shown in side by side, although these are a little bit larger. They're not quite in proportion. But the point of this image is to show how different they look from us. So we had to make the image a little bigger. But the main thing is you can really see this chin is receding. It doesn't have this protruding chin. There's not this swoop here that we see in anatomically modern humans. And lastly, most importantly in this image, I know the stegodon is super cool, but in this image, these stone tools, these aren't really basic rudimentary smack two rocks together and hope something comes out. What we're looking at here are knife blades. They call them bladelets because they're little flakes that can be used as very, very sharp cutting instruments. I mentioned in our last talk, these things are exceedingly sharp. And this plays a big part too in what we understand with LB1 or the Liang Bua specimen. First of all, what the stegodon shows us is when a big animal gets onto a small island with few resources, they tend to get smaller. Fewer resources, smaller bodies, require less resources, therefore you can live a lot longer and have a bigger population the smaller you are. Does that make sense? You don't use as much resources if you're a smaller animal. We call this insular. Insular means island. Dwarfism. This obviously, now you're probably putting this together already in your own head, but obviously this has to do with Liang Bua or Homo floresiensis is much smaller than anatomically modern humans and much smaller than the Homo erectus that came before her. What's going on? Well, it may be that she's a dwarfed Homo erectus that's on this small island. This is very interesting because we hadn't seen island dwarfism, at least not that we knew of, amongst other human populations. But then again, we haven't seen a lot of them stuck on an island for a long period of time. Now, it could also be founder effect where they went to the island as smaller folks and then just sort of produced smaller people as they were staying on that island. That may be the case. Or it may be that they've gotten smaller because the environment kind of favors smaller bodies, which we see with the stegodon. But then a lot of controversy exploded around Homo floresiensis. First off, should we call it genus Homo? She's so tiny that her brain is actually too small to be considered genus Homo. Do you remember way back when we met Homo habilis and the Homo habilis brain? And everybody decided at the time, okay, to be genus Homo, you have to have the following. You have to be able to use fire. You have to be able to create and use stone tools. Therefore, you have to have a brain big enough to do that, which at the time they assumed was 650 cc's. We're going to see that Homo floresiensis challenges those assumptions. Is that brain size has anything to absolute brain size, meaning the actual cubic centimeter size of the brain, has anything to do with intelligence within the species. This is very, very controversial and new at the time. This was about 2000, 2003. Okay, enter Teuku Jacob. That's his name in yellow. That's him in the middle of this image. He basically stole the artifacts from the scientists working on it, damaged them by trying to take molds of them and do other things. He literally returned them broken and glued back together incorrectly, and claimed that, oh, no, we didn't do anything. Okay, we might have made a mold. Okay, we might have made a lot of molds, but only made one copy of the month. It was all complete bunk. What Teuku was saying, and Teuku is a small Indonesian man, is that Homo floresiensis is actually a modern human grave. And congratulations, scientists who came in to work on this project. You've desecrated a grave site of anatomically modern humans. Well, the problem is Teuku Jacob isn't a very good paleoanthropologist. He doesn't understand a lot of the fundamentals here. Fundamentally, there's nothing that looks like an anatomically modern human. No chin, no big brain. Also, most importantly, she stood about 3 feet tall. So Teuku Jacob said, modern Indonesians are tiny. Yes, they tend to stand about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. This individual being about 150 centimeters tall. This guy, or maybe a little less, this guy stands at about 4.5 feet tall. Okay. This was Teuku Jacob's proof, quote unquote, that Indonesians are small. Well, we already knew Indonesians were relatively small, but there's a lot of problem here. First of all, this individual, you can see, has a much larger brain. Homo floresiensis' brain stands in around 380 to 400 cubic centimeters. This individual's brain is right about 1,200 cc's. Gauging guesstimate by looking at his head. It's well over 1,000 cc's. He is tiny, so his brain is probably a little smaller than the average human, which is about 1340, 1360. So I'm going to give him the benefit and say 1,200. It's still it's still 4 times, or at least 3 times larger than Homo floresiensis' brain. Furthermore, he's got a chin. He's got a very modern look. There's nothing in this individual's skull that would tell us that, but we can't tell because we can't see his skull. To this, Teuku Jacob said, well, he doesn't have a chin. Look at how far his lips protrude beyond his pouting chin. To this, the rest of the community said, are you crazy? What are you talking? This is not science. This is complete bunk. What you're doing here is just trying to uphold a notion that you have, but there's no scientific reasoning behind it. What Teuku Jacob did manage to do, in spite of destroying evidence, destroying fossils, ruining things that can't be replaced ever, and they're absolutely priceless. But aside from all of those bad things he did, what he did do is bring up, okay, skepticism. And that's a good thing for good science to emerge. Remember, skeptics make science go around. It forces the scientific community to challenge things. And that's what we like. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is how unethically Teuku Jacob did it, by stealing things and breaking things and coming up with this complete crap that somehow got published. Fundamentally, they made a lot of claims. And when I say they, I mean these 3. This is Teuku Jacob, Masha Hennenberg, and Bob Eckert. Dean Falk, who's a woman, by the way, she's brilliant, has this to say. She said, first they claimed that the Hobbit was really a modern person with microcephaly. Microcephaly is an abnormality in which the brain doesn't grow. Dr. Falk proved that that could not be true. Literally everything about it does not fit with moderns with microcephaly. The shape of the brain, the size of the brain, everything else, and the shape of the skull. None of those match what we see in moderns with microcephaly. Then they claim that he had Laron syndrome. This is another form of dwarfism. But again, nothing about the morphology, meaning the shape of this individual, had anything to do with what we're looking at with LB1 or any of the rest. So they showed beyond any reasonable doubt that that is not true. And I invite you to read Dean Falk's papers on these. It's really good. And even with Eckert, and Masha didn't really have a whole lot to say about it, but Eckert really did. And they went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for a long time, for a series of years, actually. And she consistently with good science proved that bad science just cannot hold up under scrutiny. Finally, they're taking a shot with this Down syndrome idea, and their basis for it is completely outlandish. Literally nobody else in science agrees with any of these things. But Dean Falk did her due diligence, and the team looked at everything and tore all of their arguments to shreds. Really, their basis for it was based on a bad facial reconstruction that was done, literally by an artist. Had nothing to do with anything. It's crazy. Fundamentally, we can be assured that these are not modern humans. However, should they be called genus Homo? Or should they be expanded into genus Australopithecines? Could these be the first Australopiths that left Africa? Well, that's something that was worth a look. Because if these are the first Australopiths to leave Africa, how did they get there? What we generally seem to think, and everybody's kind of agreeing with this at this point, is that these are probably a dwarfed Homo erectus. Homo erectus were in the area. It makes a lot of sense. They traveled right through there. So all of those things seem to fit. But just to be clear, this is not microcephaly, not Laron syndrome, and not Down syndrome, for sure. So they have little bodies, but remember, their brains are actually smaller than what was accepted for really years, in fact decades, that a brain had to be a certain size in order to make sophisticated tools and in order to use fire. Well, we knew they were making advanced sophisticated stone tools. We knew they were using fire. So what gives? Their brains are tiny. Well, one of the big things that she showed us, and I say she meaning Homo floresiensis, is that it's not the size, the absolute size of the brain that really counts. It is the size of the brain in proportion to the body that really counts. So let's look here. What we've got is on the bottom axis, we've got height in meters, 1 meter being about 3 feet. The average anatomically modern human is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 meters tall. Here, we've got the brain size in cubic centimeters, and we can see here is the scatter plot of anatomically modern humans. Generally speaking, the smaller we get, the smaller our brains get. The larger we get, as in body size, the larger brains we have. They're in proportion. In fact, to show this, we lay this 45-degree line down here, meaning this is normalized for anatomically modern humans. So, sure enough, we tend to scatter right around that 45-degree line. And if you look, remember Homo erectus is exactly the same height as us, but their brains are about 300 cc's smaller than ours, so they fall below this normalized line. They're still very intelligent. We know they're able to do just about everything we do. But their bodies being the same size and their brains being slightly smaller show us that they fall here, below this normalized scale here for anatomically modern humans. But look at little Floresiensis. She stands about 1 meter tall, just over 3 feet, and her brain is right around 300 to 400 cc's in size. But because her body is so small, she actually falls above this normalized line. She's smart for her size. She's brilliant. And again, it really fits with Homo erectus. So, why is Homo floresiensis such a big deal? By the way, this is a facial reconstruction that was done by my friend John Gurchi. He does a lot of the ones that I show in my videos. The assumptions that Homo floresiensis challenges, which are fantastic. We thought anatomically modern humans were alone, the only hominins on the planet since about 30,000 years ago. That's when Neanderthals, who are our closest relatives ever that we found, died out. Right about 30,000, 27,000, somewhere in there, years ago. Well, Homo floresiensis, one of the biggest surprises, was she's really young. These fossils seem to date to about 18,000 years ago, which is way younger than when we thought Homo erectus died out. We thought if they are Homo erectus, they're a late surviving Homo erectus. Maybe these little hobbits, that's what they started calling them, because it turned out the Lord of the Rings was opening same year these came forward. So they thought, hey, instead of Homo floresiensis, which is a mouthful for everybody, we'll call it the Hobbit. And it sort of stuck around. Anyway, the Homo floresiensis, if they are a Homo erectus, they're extremely late surviving. They coexisted with anatomically modern people. In fact, even in that area, we know there were anatomically modern humans in Indonesia, in the islands of Indonesia, about 10,000 years ago. So could it be that they went again another 10,000 years back? We don't know. But it's a good chance that anatomically modern humans crossed paths with these little things. And lastly, probably the most important, is that our science changed. Instead of having this hard, fast rule of, hey, to be in genus Homo, you have to have a brain size that is a minimum of 650 cc's. Now, to be in genus Homo, you have to have a brain size in proportion to your body size, which stands at a ratio. So what we're saying is your brain to body size ratio has to be above a certain thing, and then you can be in genus Homo. So lastly, I want to show you where they fall on our chart. Do you remember that earlier chart where I had taken Homo erectus and I put Homo, hate to say it, ergaster down in with Homo erectus as they belong? We have a line, a lifeline that lasts from just close, right at the border of 2 million years ago, up to about, I don't know, 400,000 years ago or so. But look at Floresiensis. If Floresiensis, who is now overlapping with anatomically modern Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, by the way, is living, and if she is in fact a Homo erectus, we now can even expand this line even further, up to right at the verge of when modern times start, so to speak. That is really, really interesting.